Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be pulling back the veil and showing you the man behind the curtain. We're going to be speaking about a man by the name of Amitai Etzioni. His last name is spelled Etzioni. He was born Werner Falk on the 4th of January 1929. He's an Israeli-American sociologist, best known for his work on socioeconomics and communitarianism. This last word that I used, communitarianism, you're going to want to look into that. It's quite an important word because it encapsulates an ideology, which again is on the far left, but is rarely ever spoken about, if at all. Etzioni is currently the director of the Institute for Communitarian Policy Studies at George Washington University. Amitai Etzioni was born Werner Falk, as we said, in Cologne, in Germany in 1929 to an Ashkenazi Jewish family. When Etzioni had turned 5, both of his parents left Germany and went to London, and they left Etzioni in the care of his grandparents. He was smuggled out of Germany soon afterwards to a train station in Italy by a relative, who soon reunited Etzioni with his parents. The family was stuck in Athens in Greece, unable to enter Palestine since his family was awarded a bachelor permit instead of a family permit. So they were stuck between Germany and Haifa. Now, Etzioni shortly afterwards found himself in Haifa, in the region that was then Mandatory Palestine, in the winter of 1937, where he had to learn another language, that being Hebrew. It was at this time he began to go by his first name, Amitai, instead of Werner, since the principal of Etzioni's new school strongly encouraged that Etzioni should introduce himself by a Hebrew name. In the spring of 1946, at the age of 16, Etzioni dropped out of high school and joined the Palmach. That's the elite commando force of the Haganah. During Etzioni's time in the Palmach, which is an underground Jewish group, basically they were carrying out a violent campaign against the British authorities to compel them to allow more Jewish immigration to Palestine and leave the country to enable a Jewish state to be established. This was Zionism in a nutshell. Etzioni participated in a Palmach operation to blow up a British radar station near Haifa. His team managed to breach the fence protecting the radar station and planted and detonated a bomb. So this guy was, for all intents and purposes, a terrorist since he was doing it for a political end. He then participated in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Following the war, he spent a year studying at the institute established by Martin Buber, and in 1951 he enrolled in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he completed both BA in 1954 and an MA in 1956 degrees for his studies in classical and contemporary works in sociology. In 1957, he went to the United States to study at the University of California in Berkeley and was a research assistant to Seymour Martin Lipset. He received his PhD in sociology in 1958. And Etzioni then remained in the United States to pursue an academic career. He later served as an advisor to several U.S. presidents, beginning with Jimmy Carter, and became an influential voice among policymakers. This guy championed this ideology that we were talking about called communitarianism. So what is it? What is this philosophy that Amitai Etzioni believed in and championed? The philosophy of communitarianism originated in the 20th century, but the term communitarian was coined in 1841 by John Goodwin Barmby, who was a leader of the British Chartist movement, who used it in referring to utopian socialists. Okay, so if you understand utopian socialism, it naturally ends up devolving into pure communism, right? And this is what this fundamentally is. However, it was not until the 1980s that the term communitarianism gained currency through association with the work of a small group of political philosophers, and the label communitarian at that time even was controversial, even among those people who believed in communitarianism, because in the West, the term communitarianism, rightly, evokes associations with the ideologies of socialism and collectivism. So public leaders and some of the academics who champion this school of thought usually avoided this term. Communitarian, while still advocating and advancing the ideas that were behind communitarianism, which is socialism and communism, the communitarian community, let's call it, basically tried to avoid having this label applied for the longest time. Communitarianism considers classical liberalism to be ontologically and epistemologically incoherent, which is not true, but that's what they assert. And they oppose, those people who are part of the communitarian movement, oppose classical liberalism on those grounds. Ideological communitarianism is characterized as a radical ideology that is marked by leftism on economic issues. So, say for example with the Fabian Society, they would be strong proponents of communitarianism. When the term is capitalized, it usually refers to the responsive communitarian movement of Amitai Etzioni. So he popularized it. Can't imagine why, can you? The author David E. Pearson argued that to earn the appellation community, it seems to me, groups must be able to exert moral suasion and extract a measure of compliance from their members. That is, communities are essentially and necessarily, indeed by definition, coercive, as well as immoral, threatening their members with the stick of sanctions if they stray, offering them the carrot of certainty and stability if they don't. So it's a carrot and stick thing, right? That's the offer that's always made by communitarians. It's basically like being a mafia member. To understand why communitarianism is a dangerous brand of leftism, you have to understand that classical liberalism was a reaction to centuries of authoritarianism. And not only authoritarianism, but authoritarianism by oppressive governments and overbearing communities and rigid dogmas. Communitarianism blows apart the importance of the individual within any given society and justifies mob rule as well as herd mentality. The communitarian philosophy also champions the idea of moral relativism, stating that there is no universal moral law, and that both ethics and morals are and should be entirely subjective. Academic communitarians argue strongly that it is a philosophical error to posit any truly universal moral values. So they're basically amoral. Important to some supporters of communitarian philosophy is the concept of positive rights. Now, this is a nonsense term that was coined during the Enlightenment. It refers to state control, basically, which is actually a moral wrong, but folks that buy into these philosophies don't understand that. I would call them ideologies, actually. However, within the worldview of communitarianism, positive rights are rights or guarantees to certain things, which may include state-subsidized education, state-subsidized housing, a safe and clean environment, universal health care, and even the right to a job with the concomitant obligation of the government or individuals to provide one. Now, this is madness, quite honestly, because you're handing over your own individual sovereignty to centralized governments and state control. Of course, by providing such rights, communitarians violate the negative rights of the citizens. The rights not to have something done for you. For example, taxation to pay for such programs as described, which dispossess individuals of property. Many learned scholars view communitarianism as a negation of natural rights and therefore natural law. Even communitarians themselves agree that negative rights may be violated by government action, but argue that it is justifiable. So they're trying to justify mob rule and mob mentality and authoritarianism in its most dangerous forms. Now, to give you a more concrete example of what communitarianism is, let me point out some of the prominent supporters of this ideology. They include the British Prime Minister, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, President Bill Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton. This literally reads like a who's who of war criminals and megalomaniacs. In the United States, within the Democratic Party, prominent communitarians include Bob Casey Jr., Joe Donnelly, and Claire McCaskill, whilst on the right, Rick Santorum is an example of communitarian republicanism. So, in closing, you can see plainly that communitarianism is just a rebranded form of socialism. It has no problem waging international expansionist wars or killing children for the sake of its own ideology, and its champion, Amitai Etzioni, a self-confessed terrorist and a reprehensible excuse for a human being, is spearheading this movement. So, it really should make you wonder. And this guy is heading policy decisions not only in the United States of America, but globally. And of course, the associations to the Fabian Society and the Club of Rome won't be lost to you, my viewers. But that's just a brief introduction, which is necessary for those of you that were completely unfamiliar with the ideology of communitarianism, which does exist, which is wholly dangerous, which has been implemented, and is probably primarily and directly responsible, politically at least, for this form of tyranny that many of us are living under currently. The EU, as an example, is an instantiation of communitarian policy being implemented, right? The European Union, that's one example of it. The Russian Federation is another. The expansionism of the United States is another. The Greater Israel Project is another. And the Chinese expansionist ideals are yet another form of it. So when you really look at it, this is what globalism is in a nutshell. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for watching. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.